From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. When you were embarking on this profile, did you even put in an interview request for Beyoncé?
No.
It was like one of the most intense weeks I've ever had in my career.
I spoke with this producer, Symbolic One, and he worked on the 4 album.
I was part of a song called Best Thing I Never Had.
Megan Agnew has been trying to get to know a cultural icon.
I can say it was intense and stressful because she had so much music.
And he said that when he turned up to produce some of this album, Beyoncé had already recorded 75 tracks.
She was basically like, okay, so I have these 5 songs that I really love the songs, but I don't care for the production.
So what they did was work day in, day out, making them sonic perfection.
She knows exactly what she wants. So it's like nitpicking and tweaking, trying to mold the song into her vision.
At which point, when they got to about 25 tracks, she organised 3 different listening parties.
Tastemakers, different designers. And then the third one was just family. So it was like 3 different consumer perspectives.
And in those listening parties, they listened to the entire, at that point, 25-track run.
And then she had these little scorecards. Every song she played, they would score 1 to 5. And then they would put little notes of like, do you think this song is a single? How does this song make you feel?
And it was this obsessive, minute data gathering in order to eventually end up with this perfect arc of 16 tracks in an album.
This week, Beyoncé and her enormous Cowboy Carter tour land in the UK for 6 nights at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But how did she go from being a Texan schoolgirl, pushed into dance classes by her parents because she was shy, to being an insanely lucrative cultural behemoth?
She is very visual. She's very intelligent.
You really get pushed to be your best being around her.
You could just tell she was passionate about music.
She just showed this incredible energy.
It's like her superpower.
The story today, Queen Bey, the making of an icon.
I'm Megan Agnew. I'm based in the US at The Times and The Sunday Times, and I'm a senior features writer.
Are you a Beyoncé fan?
No.
Oh.
I am in my early 30s, so Beyoncé was kind of everywhere, I think, growing up. And I really like her music, but I wouldn't say that I'm a mega fan. But I totally appreciate her as an artist and also as someone who's sort of been this strange presence through most of my life, I think, most of my sort of pop culture life.
You're doing her down. Cultural behemoth, surely, is what Beyoncé is.
She totally is. And the people who I was speaking to for this story, particularly Daphne Brooks, who's a professor at Yale, said, who are her peers and where are they?
The majority of them have not been able to sustain the kind of iconicity and popularity, and especially have never been on the same level as her in terms of critical acclaim.
You know, the people who were around and big when she first came to be in the early noughties. There's Gaga, who's still successful, but not in the way that she was when she first started out. Justin Timberlake, who is pretty faded.
I went past a poster the other day for Isle of Wight Festival and it said Justin Timberlake was playing and he wasn't the headliner.
Oh, God. And there's Christina Aguilera. And, you know, when you think of these names, they kind of feel like noughties relics, actually. And Beyoncé was massive then. She still is now. It's 30 years later, really. And that is, in itself, extraordinary.
How can we quantify her current success? Like, what is the scale of it?
Well, she's the biggest Grammy winner of all time at 35 Grammys. She's also the only female artist to debut all of her studio albums at #1 in the Billboard charts in the US. And her and Jay-Z are also the first billionaire couple in music. So their worth is thought around $3 billion together. I think out of any pop star or any musician right now, actually, she has the most control around her public image. She does not do interviews. The last interview really that she did was with Edward Enninful in Vogue, in which I think she said 3 words on the record and the rest he just sat through dinner at their house. She did more interviews when she was starting out in the noughties, but I think that was truly the only way to access musicians at that point. Whereas now there's so many ways and she does none of them.
Well, she's now here. The Cowboy Carter tour is in London this week for 6 nights at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. You went in New Jersey in the US back in May. What was it like, other than enormous?
It was perfect.
Perfect. You're a convert.
It was just the most brilliant machine. The dancers were in perfect formation and people were wearing the most amazing outfits, like Stetson hats and chaps and cow print, and also sort of repurposed American flags. There was this sort of chrome mechanical bucking bull that she was on at one point, and then a Cadillac that came out over the crowd, and then this sort of neon horseshoe that she sat inside. But it was a total spectacle, as those enormous, enormous stadium concerts are.
The set that she performs on becomes an extension of herself.
I spoke to this entertainment architect, Ray Winkler, who worked on her Coachella stage, as well as various other tour stages. And he said that she designs stages like they're cathedrals.
If you're sitting at the very back, you can't really see what's happening in the front, but you can certainly take in the magnificent architecture around it. So the stained glass windows of a 14th century Gothic cathedral are replaced by a 21st century LED wall.
And behind her, it was this enormous screen, which they'd basically made the most beautiful short videos that they had in between the different acts, of which there were 8, went on for about 3 hours. Yeah, it was a long show. You got your money's worth. But I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I found it quite affecting, actually.
In what way?
It was so considered and it was so layered, the messaging. And it was a lot about the repurposing of American identity and this imagery that we've come to associate, particularly under this administration, so closely with MAGA and Republicanism and Trump. I found it quite uplifting, actually, to see this reclamation of patriotism in a different context.
And part of that comes from the fact that this is a tour largely centred around her latest album, which is a country album, which is quite a departure for her.
She'd had a country tracks. She had one in Lemonade, Daddy Lessons. She performed that at the Country Music Awards in 2016 with the Dixie Chicks. And that performance really sparked quite a lot of debate in the days and weeks afterwards.
I remember it was just a big fucking brouhaha that you showed up with Beyoncé, right. Criticized for that, right?
The week we worked with Beyoncé is the single greatest working week of my professional life. It was awesome. It's Absolutely. The highest rated 15 minutes in CMA history. And then they start getting, racist assholes bombarding their website with comments and emails and whatever. And so they take her down. They took our performance down and caved to that bullshit.
And it was this quite tense moment between Beyoncé and country music fans that really brought to light actually quite a lot of racism in that part of the industry. And this feeling, she latterly said, of not being welcomed.
I used to say I spoke too country, and the rejection came, said I wasn't country enough, said I wouldn't saddle up.
So for the last 5 years, she's been producing this album, Cowboy Carter, which kind of pushes up against all of that and reclaims or claims the identity that is her own as well as others.
I said they never take the country out of me. I got hot sauce in my bag.
And also a lot of it is wrapped up with racial identity as well, and how that intersects with country music as well, which traditionally has always been thought of as very white.
Totally. And also cowboy culture. You know, all these black cowboys had such an enormous impact on the ability to farm land, on wealth, on culture, on all of that. And cowboy culture is so associated with whiteness and white southernness. And when I was speaking to Daphne Brooks at Yale, she said that this is an album about this cultural identity and this cultural wealth that black people in America had such an enormous part of creating, but no access to.
You know, the long history of racial capitalism in the recording industry, meaning that, you know, black culture workers did not reap the benefits of the contributions that they made to the culture.
And so many interesting little references as well. I mean, even the title of the whole album is Cowboy Carter and the Rodeo Chitlin Circuit Tour.
Yeah, exactly. So the Chitlin Circuit was this network of music venues in the South, which allowed black musicians to perform in the sort of late 19th century during segregation.
We've never had a pop icon of her stature take on really the history of Jim Crow and the recording industry as a theme for a record. It's just never been done before, you know, right?
And has all of this boiled into critical success for her?
Critical success, yes, yeah. Cowboy Carter was sort of quite widely seen as being her most ambitious album. One of the songs, Texas Hold'em, had her longest #1 run in the UK. But the tour itself has sold more slowly than previous ones, perhaps because the set list is quite dominated by Cowboy Carter. And when it does come to these like enormous acts like a Beyoncé, everyone does just want to hear the old bangers as well.
We want Love on Top. We want Single Ladies.
Yeah.
If I Were a Boy.
She didn't do If I Were a Boy.
Classic.
But she did the others. But it's pretty Cowboy Carter dominant. It's her show, yeah.
Yes. So let's rewind to actually how it all started for her. Was she always in a sort of musical family? Was she always destined for something like this, do we think?
She grew up in this upper middle class home in Houston, Texas. She went to private school and they had a housekeeper, and her mother opened a successful hairdresser and her father was a salesman for Xerox. And the father was sort of applied more pressure.
Applying pressure in a showbiz sort of Mama Rose kind of way.
Latterly, yeah. So he then became her manager, and she was put into dance classes because she was so painfully shy in school. And she went to dance classes and kind of just bloomed. And then the dance teacher noticed she could sing, and then she started doing these pageants and she won all of them. And then they sort of started this little band, including Kelly Rowland, who then went on to be in Destiny's Child. But they were great childhood friends, and they had this cute little girl band when they were, 12, 13 years old. And the father, Beyoncé's father, Matthew, trained them. And he also built a stage for them in their garden for her and her younger sister Solange, who sort of has also gone on to be this mega pop star. He had boot camps for them in the summer. He'd make them sing while they ran around the sort of like local area to increase their ability to project and their stamina. And he was really deeply involved in it all and involved in their success. And there's a line or a moment in Tina Knowles, so her mother's recent memoir called Matriarch, and she sort of turns to Beyoncé, who's like 14, a teenager at the time, and says, like, is it too much? Is your father's pressure too much? And Beyoncé sort of turned around and said, no, of course not. Like, I love it. I need it. We want this.
She really hit the big time with Destiny's Child, her girl group. They first charted in 1997 when she was still a teenager. The dad was still there. He was managing them.
And certainly in the media too, it was assumed that the father had control, that Beyoncé had sort of no creative input, that she was kind of like the doll and her father was pulling the strings. So I think that also seemed to be frustrating for her and was really seemingly the reason that she broke away from him in the late noughties.
Destiny's Child is a huge success, of course. Independent Woman, Bills, 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 Bootylicious. When do they actually start going their separate ways? When does Beyoncé become Beyoncé and not one of Destiny's Child?
So they go on this hiatus in 2000, which is also the year that Beyoncé first meets Jay-Z at a music festival. And she's 18 at this point. She's so young. I mean, also so young to have had such enormous success with a girl band and already be going on hiatus. Like, we do also have to see her as being a child star that's sort of survived. So she meets Jay-Z and he's 30, and they sort of go on to be friends in the years after, supposedly. And then they do the track Crazy in Love together in 2003, which went to #1 and was just this enormous hit. That was also when Destiny's Child really went their separate ways and Beyoncé was standalone Beyoncé.
So she bins off Destiny's Child. She has that really successful solo album, I Am Sasha Fierce, but also bins her father as manager as well. Does that then change her and what she does?
Yeah, so after her separation from her dad as manager, she definitely veers away from the sort of mainstream pop. That's what the producer, Symbolic One, said that she wanted from that album, the 4 album, when she started out.
I think going into this album, what she was trying to do is show a more vulnerable side, because, as you know, this album was a little more intimate, a little more soulful than her previous works.
Certainly, she becomes even more deeply involved because she is the one. She is the manager of herself. And Natalie will go on to sort of start her own company in order to ensure that. So she's really, really in the minutiae of this album. It's totally hers.
Megan, we're charting Beyoncé's rise up the music and pop culture greasy pole. We were just talking about her incredible attention to detail. I mean, so much so earlier on, she had 75 songs for one album and was canvassing the scored opinions of people to see what should actually be the singles and what should be in the album itself. Does that spread everywhere in terms of her work, the music videos, the live shows?
So yeah, the level of detail also transferred obviously over to the choreography. And I spoke to James Allsop, who choreographed Run the World, as well as various others.
The song wasn't out. And so that's when she was truly shrouded in secrecy because she was scared of everything leaking.
She had to fly from LA to New York just to listen to the track because it was so tightly guarded.
But I only had a few hours, literally, between hearing the song and showing her the choreography.
Wow. She's in the studio and Beyoncé appears and says, "Show me what you've got."
I remember there was one part that wasn't really working out movement-wise, so I had like an hour to go fix it and to come back in the room. And it was one of those like do or die hours, like fix it or don't come back.
They were seemingly just pushed hard. But everyone that I spoke to seemed happy to have been pushed that hard.
It really made me such a better choreographer, and it made me be able to think on the fly, to be able to adapt to any situation because something might change at the drop of a dime.
That was James talking about working with her back in 2011. But if we jump ahead a few years, I remember watching that Netflix documentary Homecoming, which was her 2018 Coachella performance, and cut into it was lots of behind the scenes documentary footage of how they actually put that show together over many, many months. Interestingly, as you were saying earlier on, doesn't do a lot of interviews, but will give you insight through a Beyoncé produced and edited documentary that she has control over. And in that, you saw her at one point complaining about the live mix of the sound with the brass and exactly how that needed to be. But then also going through these incredible choreography drills to get herself back into shape after giving birth to twins. The drive there is incredible.
I know, and you can't help but think no one but her is asking her to do. Of course, her fans are, but any sort of creativity like that is totally self-motivated, and the standard she sets herself is extraordinary. And I do wonder whether, I mean, her brand is that she is perfection, that she's this sort of goddess superstar, this otherworldly being. And
she's not Jenny from the block.
She's not Jenny from, and she's also not like Charlie XCX, like smoking ciggies and not wearing bras and like, but that's so Gen Z-y. Beyonce's not a step out of time. And I just wonder how sustainable that is going to be, whether people accept that, whether she is just megastar and that's who she is, or whether that will feel in some way tired or of another era at some point. And I think she's been very conscious too about the control that she has over her work. Kevin Allred, who has sort of studied her and written about her, said that there's this rumour, I guess, that the Parkwood Studios, which is her company, is filled with her archive and archive material.
Almost like an athlete, she watches the tapes back and sees how she can improve, what she needs to do the next time.
And that might have come from Prince, who was a friend of hers and a sort of mentor.
And actually, I think she's mentioned how Prince told her to be in charge of your own image, archive everything, keep it yourself so that they don't have control over what they put out about you.
So seemingly she's done the same thing.
So we've got this image of an icon, a very successful musician who has this incredible drive. She has applied that to politics. 2013
was really the moment that she first became political with a small p. That album, the self-titled album, was really feminist. And she performed in front of an enormous sign that said feminist behind her. And she sampled the TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, We Should All Be Feminists.
We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be...
And right now, looking back, that seems like a real pop feminism era, but Beyoncé came at the beginning of that. So it did feel quite radical at the time. And then latterly in Lemonade, she addressed police brutality. And outside of music, she has supported and fundraised for Clinton, the Obamas, and most recently for Kamala Harris. So she gave permission for Harris to use her song Freedom in her presidential campaign last summer.
So join us. Go to KamalaHarris.com and let's get to work.
I'ma keep running because the winner don't quit on themselves.
But she's definitely become more bold, and Daphne Brooks really puts that down to this comment in 2013 by the now late civil rights activist and artist Harry Belafonte, who sort of called out her and Jay-Z for not being political enough and for not addressing civil, cultural, socio-political issues in the way that they should be as sort of black stars and, at that point, mega millionaires.
Late 2012 into 2013, he makes these comments saying that, neither of them were using their cultural clout to contribute to the Black freedom struggle.
And criticism from the other side of the aisle. Donald Trump thinks they're all just doing this for money. He's accused them of being paid by the Harris campaign, people like Beyoncé.
Exactly. She's become this focal point, really, for Trump and Republicans to show that Kamala Harris was far too associated with celebrities. And he keeps throwing around this number, which is $11 million that apparently Beyoncé was paid, which sort of can't be stood up. No one quite knows where that's come from.
And she's someone who has obviously made it known her support for not just women's rights, but also gay rights. But at the same time, while we're talking about the money, taking a huge fat wad of cash from the Emiratis to do a big show in Dubai.
And that was shortly after she'd released Renaissance, this album which was really sort of paying homage to ballroom culture in New York and drag culture. But then she went to Dubai, exactly, and took this enormous paycheck to play at a private party.
$24 million, according to Forbes.
$24 million.
Speaking of the money, again, it's not just that she's making lots of money from albums, and obviously tours is the big thing now where musicians can make a lot of whack. She's got fingers in other business pies.
Yeah, she has hair care products. She also does campaigns for Levi and Tiffany. And she also has this whiskey. It's an enormous business empire, and she's making money in all the ways that she can.
But gives back.
So she has Be Good, which is a charity foundation that supports businesses. It's supported families and communities after disasters. And one of the things that it actually did for the last tour, for the Renaissance tour is support Black-owned businesses near the stadiums in which she was performing. And I spoke to one of them, which was this Nigerian tapas restaurant in Tottenham called Chukwu's. And the grant they received was $10,000, which is about 8,000 quid.
You know, you can't get a bigger endorsement than being able to tell people your restaurants won a grant from Beyoncé.
And it was in some way helpful to them.
There was definitely an uptick in customers visiting us after then for like the couple of months that followed.
And they've also had support apparently from Be Good and these sorts of mentoring calls.
You know, we're talking 2 years on that we're still in touch and keeping them up to date with what we're up to, and they're like following our journey.
What about her personal life? Because as you said, she's a very private person, doesn't give a lot of interviews, but there's still always lots of interest about, well, not just her husband, but also the kids.
Well, the kids were all on stage with her, or two of them were, Rumi, the twin daughter, and then the older daughter, Blue, Ivy. And she had the biggest cheers from the crowd, honestly, and she was brilliant. I thought she was great. And I also found it quite moving, actually, seeing them on stage together, and it was certainly very cute. But her relationship with Jay-Z has been so private. In 2014, there's this spat in an elevator between Jay-Z and Beyoncé's sister, Solange. There's this moment that's latterly released, I think, on TMZ. They sort of buy the footage. And Solange seems to be shouting at him and sort of trying to thrash out and lash out at him. And there was just, and has always been, this speculation about what quite went on. And Lemonade seemingly is this album about infidelity and about Becky with the good hair and about a marriage under strain from that and what that means in the wider, like, historical context.
He only want me when I'm not there. You better call Becky with the good hair.
And that is the moment that everyone harks back to and thinks, why was she doing that? What was she so angry about? And that's sort of like part of the lore, isn't it, of their relationship?
Yes, but then also recently questions, although the lawsuit in question was withdrawn, about Jay-Z and possible involvement with some of the accusations levelled at Sean Combs.
Yeah, there was a civil suit that was filed against him. He was initially not named in it by a girl who was 13 at the time who says that she was raped by both Diddy and Jay-Z. They obviously both vehemently denied the allegations and the claim was withdrawn.
So the tour rolls into town, Cowboy Carter. It's projected to make $325 million from just 32 shows. And yet, as you sort of hinted at earlier on, it's not been like previous tours. It's not been like Taylor Swift's Eras tour where you had to sell a family member to get a ticket.
There are still tickets left. Resale tickets seemingly are sort of definitely fluctuating. Phyllis Ackerline, my colleague in the US, actually wrote about that, how because so much ticket sales now is dependent on demand, you can buy really high and then the next day it just sort of plummets. So it's difficult to really tell, but there are certainly some left over. And Renaissance sold out very, very quickly.
And the future for Beyoncé is what? Another album with another genre and then another big tour and then rinse and repeat?
So Renaissance and Cowboy Carter are part of a trilogy of albums. So yes, there will be a third one. And then who knows? But I wonder whether the family members seemingly are more and more involved, Blue, Ivy on stage more, whether that seems also to be becoming much more part of her cultural identity as a sort of like uber matriarch, this sort of like guardian, I guess, of generations before and generations after is really how she styles herself in her music and on stage. So I suspect that inheritance by her children will become more central to her work.
Megan, thank you.
Thanks, Luke.
Megan Agnew, senior features writer for The Times and Sunday Times in the US. You can read plenty more of Megan's work at thetimes.com, including her piece about the making of Beyoncé. That is it from us today. The producer today was Hannah Varrell, the executive producer was Molly Guinness, and sound design and theme composition was by Mal Lassetto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.